July 9th, 2026, 8:33 local time. The Sea of Japan, approximately 190 nautical miles west of the Japanese port of Akita, and 310 nautical miles east of the North Korean coastline near Hwasong. The morning sky is clear and pale blue, the sea a deep indigo with a low swell of 1.4 meters from the southwest. Visibility is unlimited. A U.S. carrier strike group is holding a north by northeast transit, conducting its third consecutive week of freedom of navigation operations in the Sea of Japan, a deliberate, sustained presence signal responding to the most intense period of North Korean ballistic missile testing since 2022. At the center of the formation, a Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier is recovering the morning's first combat air patrol. 2 FA-18E Super Hornets, fuel light, settling into the break on final approach. The carrier's air wing has been flying 2 cap cycles per day for 19 days. The crew is tired in the specific professional way that military personnel are tired when they are doing demanding work correctly and continuously. Alert, but worn at the edges. The strike group's Aegis assets: 2 Arleigh Burke Flight 3 guided missile destroyers, 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser, have their Spy-6 and Spy-1 radar systems in continuous active operation. They are, collectively, one of the most capable sensor and engagement networks ever assembled on the surface of the ocean. They are about to encounter a weapon they have never engaged in combat. Welcome. I'm your host at Navy Legends. Tonight, we are covering the scenario that has occupied the most classified pages in U.S. Pacific Fleet wargaming for the past 4 years. The employment of a hypersonic glide vehicle against a carrier strike group at sea. Not the Chinese DFZF, not the Russian Avangard. Tonight we are examining the North Korean Hwasong-8, a weapon that the world's press has largely treated as a curiosity, a propaganda achievement, a regime demonstration of technical ambition, rather than a credible military threat. That assessment is wrong. And tonight we are going to examine exactly why it is wrong, in precise tactical and physical detail, using the engagement data from a fictional but technically grounded employment scenario in the Sea of Japan on July 9th, 2026. This is a fictional simulation. Every system named is real. Every physics calculation is grounded in documented performance parameters. Let's begin. The Hwasong-8 was first publicly tested by North Korea in September 2021. Western analysts initially assessed it as a relatively primitive hypersonic glide vehicle, a maneuvering re-entry body mounted on a Hwasong-class ballistic missile booster, capable of sustained hypersonic flight at Mach 5 to Mach 10 during its glide phase, with a terminal maneuver capability that, in the 2021 test, appeared limited. By early 2024, revised DIA assessments based on updated collection had substantially upgraded the threat characterization. The Hwasong-8's guidance system had been improved. Its maneuver authority, the lateral range it could reach from its nominal glide path, had been extended. Its thermal protection system had been refined to sustain hypersonic flight for longer durations. By July 2026, the Hwasong-8 represented something that no U.S. Navy surface combatant had ever faced in combat. A hypersonic glide vehicle with a range exceeding 1,500 kilometers, a sustained cruise altitude of 40 to 60 kilometers during the glide phase, a terminal approach velocity of Mach 8.5, and a maneuvering re-entry profile that could shift the weapon's impact point by up to 40 kilometers laterally during the terminal phase. The physics of engaging such a weapon are not a matter of opinion. They are a matter of geometry, velocity, and the fundamental performance envelopes of the defensive systems available. The SM-3 Block IIA, the primary U.S. Navy anti-ballistic missile interceptor, is designed to engage ballistic missile re-entry vehicles in the exoatmospheric phase, above the atmosphere, where the target is following a predictable ballistic arc, and the SM-3's kill vehicle can compute and execute a precise intercept against a hypersonic glide vehicle that never enters the predictable ballistic arc, that instead glides at 50 kilometers altitude, maneuvering continuously, never presenting the steady inertial profile that the SM-3's guidance was designed to track. The engagement geometry is degraded. The SM-6, the Extended Range Active Standard Missile, can theoretically engage hypersonic glide vehicles in the terminal phase, when the weapon descends into the upper atmosphere and its velocity has partially degraded. The SM-6's active radar seeker and its Mach 3.5 maximum speed give it a closing velocity envelope that can intercept targets traveling at Mach 5 to Mach 6 in the terminal phase. If the geometry is favorable, if the engagement range is sufficient, and if the target's maneuver authority during the terminal phase does not exceed the SM-6 seeker's ability to maintain track. Against a Mach 8.5 terminal velocity, the closing velocity calculation becomes extremely demanding. These were the numbers that Pacific Fleet analysts had been gaming. These were the numbers that the tactical action officers aboard the strike group's destroyers had been briefed on in their most recent threat update, 6 days before July 9th. The briefing was classified. It was thorough. It did not make the problem solvable. It made the problem precisely understood. At 8:17 local time, 16 minutes before our timestamp, a North Korean road-mobile launcher vehicle in a pre-surveyed firing position in a mountain valley, 34 kilometers northwest of Hwasong, completed its pre-launch sequence. The launcher was a modified version of the Hwasong-12 transporter erector launcher, adapted for the larger and heavier Hwasong-8 system. The pre-launch sequence, erection, fueling, alignment, fire control handshake had taken 51 minutes, beginning at 7:26. At 7:26, when the launch sequence had begun, a US KH-13 reconnaissance satellite had been 11 minutes away from overhead collection geometry on the Hwasong coastal zone. By the time the satellite reached collection geometry at 7:37, the launcher vehicle was already in firing position, but the thermal signature of the fueling operation was not yet detectable against the background clutter of the surrounding terrain in the available spectral bands. The satellite passed. The next collection opportunity on that orbit was 94 minutes later. At 8:17, the Hwasong-8 launched. The boost phase, the period during which the ballistic missile booster is burning, pushing the glide vehicle to its release altitude and velocity, lasted 147 seconds. During the boost phase, the missile's thermal signature is enormous. A brilliant infrared plume visible to space-based early warning satellites from thousands of kilometers away. The US space-based infrared system satellite in geosynchronous orbit over the Pacific detected the launch at 8:17:09, 9 seconds after liftoff, and transmitted the launch detection alert to the ground-based Midcourse Defense System Operations Center at Schriever Space Force Base, and, simultaneously, to Pacific Fleet Command. The alert reached the Carrier Strike Group's Tactical Command Network at 8:17:44, 44 seconds after launch. The boost phase ended at 8:19:27, when the glide vehicle separated from the expended booster at an altitude of approximately 100 kilometers and began its hypersonic glide descent toward its target. At separation, the Hwasong-8's trajectory data, derived from the SBIRS detection and the first seconds of post-separation tracking by Space Force radar assets, indicated a nominal aim point that placed the weapon's projected impact zone in a corridor 180 kilometers wide, centered on the Carrier Strike Group's last known position. The 180-kilometer uncertainty corridor reflected the weapon's known maneuver authority. The analysts did not know where within that corridor the weapon would actually aim. The strike group had been alerted. Its Aegis systems were tracking. The tactical action officers on both destroyers and the cruiser were managing the engagement problem simultaneously. The problem was severe. The Hwasong-8 during its glide phase was flying at 50 to 55 kilometers altitude, below the effective engagement ceiling of the SM-3 Block IIA in its standard intercept mode, which is optimized for targets above 70 kilometers, but above the effective ceiling of the SM-6 in its standard anti-air mode, which degrades significantly above 33 kilometers. The glide vehicle was in the altitude gap between the two primary interceptor systems' optimal engagement envelopes. The SM-3 could be fired. Its kinematics allowed it to reach the glide vehicle's altitude, but engaging a maneuvering target at 50 kilometers altitude, traveling at Mach 9.1 in the glide phase, with a kill vehicle designed to intercept ballistic trajectories. The engagement geometry required the SM-3 to predict where the glide vehicle would be at intercept points several minutes in the future, based on its current trajectory, while the glide vehicle was actively maneuvering. The Aegis Baseline 9.C software had been updated in 2025 with an experimental hypersonic threat engagement mode, a software package designated Increment 3.2 that attempted to address this problem by using a predictive filtering algorithm to estimate the glide vehicle's future position based on its observable maneuver pattern. The algorithm was good. It had performed well in simulation. It had never been tested against a real hypersonic glide vehicle. At 8/21/14, the lead destroyer's tactical action officer authorized the first SM-3 Block IIA engagement under Increment 3.2. 2 missiles left the VLS at 4-second intervals, their guidance systems handed off to the Aegis Engagement Manager's hypersonic mode. At 8/22/41, the second destroyer fired 2 more SM-3s as the Hwasong-8's glide trajectory carried it through a maneuver sequence. A lateral jink of approximately 28 kilometers to the north, followed by a return toward the projected aimpoint corridor. That was consistent with the weapon actively cross-checking its position against an onboard navigation update. The first SM-3 missed by 14.3 kilometers. The Increment 3.2 algorithm had predicted the post-jink position correctly in direction, but underestimated the magnitude of the lateral displacement. The kill vehicle executed its terminal guidance correction, but ran out of lateral divert capability 14.3 kilometers short of the actual target position. The second SM-3 missed by 6.1 kilometers, a significantly better result, the algorithm having updated its maneuver magnitude estimate based on the first vehicle's terminal tracking data. Still a miss. The third SM-3, fired from the second destroyer with a 90-second delay that had allowed the algorithm to incorporate both prior missed data points into its prediction, achieved the best solution geometry of any of the 4 intercept attempts. Its kill vehicle reached a closest approach of 2.2 kilometers. At hypersonic velocities, 2.2 kilometers is not a proximity detonation. The SM-3 Block IIA does not have a proximity fuse. It is a hit-to-kill weapon. 2.2 kilometers is a clean miss. The fourth SM-3 missed by 8.7 kilometers. Its solution degraded by a second lateral maneuver. The Hwasong-8 executed at 08/24/03. A maneuver that the algorithm had not predicted because it occurred outside the timing pattern of the first jink sequence. 4 SM-3s, 4 misses. The Hwasong-8 was now in its terminal phase, descending into the upper atmosphere, its velocity increasing as it dove toward its target. At 8/24/31, the weapon crossed 33 kilometers altitude, the upper boundary of the SM-6's effective engagement envelope. The tactical action officer aboard the lead destroyer immediately authorized SM-6 engagement. 4 missiles left the VLS in a rapid sequence, their active radar seekers attempting to acquire a target traveling at Mach 8.5 at 28 kilometers altitude on a steep dive trajectory. The SM-6 seeker acquired the Hwasong-8 at 08/24/44 on 2 of the 4 rounds. The other 2 acquired spurious returns. Plasma ionization from the hypersonic vehicle's shockwave created electromagnetic interference that appeared as additional contacts to the active radar seeker. The 2 false acquisitions were identified and discarded by the seeker logic within 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds cost the missiles their optimal intercept geometry. Of the 2 SM-6 with confirmed target acquisition, the first achieved a detonation at 4.1 nautical miles from the carrier. Not a direct hit on the Hwasong-8's warhead body, but a proximity detonation within the SM-6's MK-137 warhead fragmentation radius. The blast and fragmentation pattern struck the hypersonic glide vehicle's aeroshell along its left leading edge, damaging the thermal protection tiles and destabilizing the vehicle's aerodynamic control surfaces. The Hwasong-8's terminal guidance, already working under the extreme thermal and electromagnetic stress of hypersonic re-entry, lost coherent control authority at 8/25/02. The vehicle's aim point, which had been tracking toward the carrier's projected position, began to drift. The drift was not random. The aerodynamic damage had introduced a consistent left bias into the vehicle's lift-to-drag ratio, pulling the impact point consistently to the left of the intended aim point. The Hwasong-8 impacted the ocean at 8/25/11, 340 meters off the carrier's port bow. The warhead, a 480 kilogram high explosive semi-armor piercing body, detonated on water impact. At Mach 6.2 terminal velocity at the moment of impact, the kinetic energy of the vehicle itself was equivalent to a small tactical bomb. The combined kinetic and explosive effect created a detonation that registered as a 3.1 magnitude seismic event on the nearest monitoring station in Japan. The pressure wave struck the carrier's hull at 8:25 and 12 seconds. The ship shuddered through its entire 337-meter length. Equipment racks in every compartment shifted. 17 sailors were knocked off their feet. The two FA-18Es in the landing pattern, on final approach when the detonation occurred, were thrown into violent lateral oscillations by the blast wave. The lead aircraft recovered. The second, at 200 feet altitude and slow airspeed, did not. The pilot ejected at 8:25 and 14 seconds. The ejection seat functioned correctly. The aircraft impacted the ocean 90 meters off the carrier's starboard side. The pilot was recovered by a rescue helicopter at 8:31:40. 6 minutes and 26 seconds after ejection. With compression fractures in 2 vertebrae from the ejection sequence and moderate hypothermia from water immersion, he survived. The carrier was not hit. The detonation at 340 meters caused no hull penetration, no flooding, no structural damage beyond stress loading within the ship's survivability design envelope. The blast wave had broken 23 portholes in the forward accommodation spaces, ruptured 1 hydraulic line in the hangar bay, and shattered the glass faces of approximately 140 analog instruments throughout the ship's mechanical spaces. 11 sailors sustained injuries from falls, equipment displacement, or blast concussion. None were life-threatening. By any engineering definition, the carrier had survived. The SM-6 proximity detonation had degraded the weapon's guidance at the critical moment and saved the ship. The after-action analysis produced 2 findings that would dominate the subsequent Pacific Fleet planning cycle. The first was the SM-3 engagement result. 4 shots, 4 misses, best closest approach 2.2 kilometers. The increment 3.2 algorithm had improved with each shot. The learning curve was real. But 4 SM-3s at $27 million each had consumed $108 million in defensive inventory and had not stopped the weapon. The SM-3 engagement against a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle under current software and hardware configuration was assessed as tactically useful for trajectory shaping, forcing the weapon to expend maneuver authority, but not reliably lethal. The second finding was the SM-6 proximity result. The conventional wisdom in missile defense doctrine holds that proximity detonations against hypersonic vehicles are ineffective because the vehicle's thermal protection system and hardened warhead body can survive fragmentation at hypersonic velocities. The July 9th engagement demonstrated that at least for the Hwasong-8's thermal protection tile configuration, proximity fragmentation at the right angle and the right range could produce aerodynamic degradation sufficient to deflect the aim point. The deflection at 340 meters was not sufficient to guarantee miss. The deflection at 200 meters might have been. The deflection at 100 meters almost certainly would have been. The implication was a tactical refinement. SM-6 engagement of hypersonic glide vehicles should be optimized for closest possible approach rather than maximum probability of direct fragmentation kill. The warhead setting and fuse timing needed to be adjusted accordingly. These refinements were classified, documented, and submitted to the Naval Sea Systems Command for rapid engineering incorporation. The estimated timeline for fleet-wide implementation of updated SM-6 fuse settings was 90 days. The North Korean state media reported nothing about the launch on July 9th for 14 hours. When the report came, it described a successful test of an advanced precision strike system and congratulated the engineers and military scientists responsible. It made no reference to the carrier strike group or to the proximity of the detonation to a U.S. naval formation. The United States government issued a formal protest through diplomatic channels. The protest was acknowledged. No response was provided. Japan's defense ministry issued its own statement, noting that the ballistic missile launch had violated multiple UN Security Council resolutions and constituted a threat to regional stability. The statement called for an emergency Security Council session. China declined to support the Security Council session. Russia vetoed the resulting resolution draft. The Sea of Japan is 978,000 square kilometers of deep, open water between Japan, South Korea, and the Korean Peninsula. It is the primary operating area for U.S. carrier strike groups, providing deterrent presence on the Korean Peninsula. It is also, as July 9th demonstrated with uncomfortable precision, the operating area in which the North Korean Hwasong-8 was designed to be used. The distance from the Wonsan coast to the center of the Sea of Japan is approximately 300 to 400 kilometers, well within the Hwasong-8's range. A carrier operating at any position in the sea within 1,000 kilometers of North Korea is within engagement range of the weapon. Yeah, that is the entire Sea of Japan. There is no position in the Sea of Japan from which a carrier strike group is outside the Hwasong-8's range. This is what Navy Legends has to confront directly. The era in which U.S. carrier strike groups could operate in proximity to a regional adversary's coastline with confidence that the adversary lacked the technical means to threaten the carrier itself. That era is over. It ended not with the DF-21D, not with the Zircon, but quietly and incompletely, with a weapon that the international press called a propaganda stunt when it was first tested in 2021. The carrier strike group remains irreplaceable. Its air wing, its presence, its deterrent signal. None of those things can be replicated by any other platform or formation. But irreplaceable does not mean invulnerable. And the gap between those two words is exactly the space in which the next generation of Pacific Fleet planning needs to operate. With directed energy weapons, with improved Increment 4.0 hypersonic engagement software, with longer-range unmanned strike assets that reduce the carrier's need to operate close to the threat, and with a sober, classified acknowledgement that the defensive intercept problem against maneuvering hypersonic weapons is not yet solved. July 9th was 340 meters from a very different conversation. Stay informed. Stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next one.